Dan, and in for Amy this morning is John Cass of johncassnews.com. John, thanks as always for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate talking to this audience, and I might explore some advertising here. What do you think?
Very good. Yeah, sure. With all that cash you're making from subscriptions now,
I wish.
Put it to work. Leverage it. All right, let's talk a little bit of 1-6 because we have our friend Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano in the offing. This is thinking about 1-6 and why it's important prospectively, according to the left. This is the argument they're making, is that because what you saw on January 6th was an indication of this movement, this insurgency afoot in the nation, of millions of people, Trump voters, extremists, those two phrases are used interchangeably, who believe that violence is okay as a means to resolve political disputes and who are ready to storm the castle again if they don't get the election results they want in 22 or 24, and we must save our democracy from them. This is I think, a fair summation of what they're saying. Here's an example, and this is somebody we've had on the show before who's otherwise a fairly serious person. But it seems to me when fairly serious people, to the extent that they make rare appearances on places like MSNBC, they become much less serious when they have to deal with the Nicole Wallaces of the world. And that's what happened to Frank Figliuzzi, who had this to say.
Excellent question, because we are looking at what I would call an entrenched insurgency at this point, a decentralized insurgency, meaning, it's no longer an emergent threat, and you can't say, well, we're going to stop the 3%ers and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. There's a lot of accountability taking place right now in the form of over 700 indictments, and that is having an effect. But the effect, as we've just learned, is that people are saying, I don't want to get arrested at the Capitol. I'm going to go local. And that is a strategy now, and it's melding with people in suits and ties who go, yep, we are going local. We're taking over through violent threats, often, by the way, electoral officials and processes. So what's changed?
And so the insurgent could be that guy in your company on the Zoom call. It could be the person standing right next to you in the suit and tie at the law firm. This is what Frank Figliuzzi is essentially saying. The insurgency has gone underground, but it's very real and it's happening locally. It actually doesn't sound dissimilar from the arguments we heard from Merrick Garland's Department of Justice and all those flacking for him about parents showing up to school board meetings. That was supposed to be part of some insurgency, too, and these public officials need to be protected from parents who are upset about some of the policy choices being made in the areas of COVID or curriculum.
I don't know. You take your political opponents, you demonize them, you kick them like dogs till they have no place to go. And then when they disagree, what do? You take them to room 101 and strap the rat cage on their face.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this is about. You know that. It's about demonizing political opponents. I remember Ron Brownstein just a few weeks ago, was it last week? Somebody made a joke on TV about Let's Go Brandon. And this guy, now he's a former LA Times guy, and now he's an editor at The Atlantic, comparing it to a joke about Let's Go Brandon is the insurgency.
Right.
And it must be rooted out. They won't stop. This is how they are.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's an interesting point, is the angle to disenfranchise enough people from civil society in order to foment the insurgency they're trying to describe at present. Well, let's get some perspective on that question from Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of the book Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, what do you think about that question?
Well, coming at this from an analyst perspective, for somebody who worked on homeland security and public safety issues for well over 20 years now, there's no data for this at all. I mean, they said 700 arrests, none of which were for insurrection, a small fraction of which were anything that violent. And yet they ignore we had several months of organized political violence on the part of Antifa and BLM. And if everyone who committed a crime was investigated to the degree of 1/6 and arrested for actually committing a crime, the number of people that would be arrested and sitting in jail now would be in the thousands, in the many thousands. And so from just a numbers perspective, the organized violence that BLM and Antifa did dwarfed anything. And that was legitimately organized political violence, exactly the kind of threat that they're complaining about. That's exactly what BLM and Antifa were, and they completely ignore that.
But Jim,
and I agree.
Well,
When you take away that there is no data for this, it's very difficult to escape any other conclusion than this is just like everything else. It's politically driven to demonize your enemies, just in the way Georgia was attacked for having Jim Crow laws, even though we know other states have far more stringent voter laws than
like
Georgia.
Like Delaware.
Yeah, exactly. So it is. I agree. It's very difficult to say this isn't just. I don't want to say politics as usual because it's very unusual to essentially demonize many tens of millions of Americans because they don't agree with your politics, and accuse them of not just being stupid and having bad politics and being rednecks, but actually accusing them of being threats against the United States. And this comes at a time when actually the global terrorist threat is actually rising. We just had a threat from Iran to conduct terrorism against the United States. And what I really worry about in a very sincere way is that because of the politics of this, the Department of Justice and the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are more fixated on satisfying the political narrative than they are actually on hunting down real public safety threats.
well, with respect to Antifa, we know that's only an idea, and with respect to Black Lives Matter, we know those protests were mostly peaceful.
And corporate.
But just because, I mean, I guess to play devil's advocate, perhaps a Frank Figliuzzi would say, Jim, just because we can't exactly quantify it doesn't mean that there aren't indications that experts in law enforcement like him can read as indications of something larger that's afoot. Is that fair to say that there are there's pockets of insurgency or a real insurgency that's afoot? Is that fair to say?
No, of course not. And actually, for a person involved in law enforcement to say that, it's absolutely abysmal. I mean, the whole idea of a free society is being able to actually define that very bright line between legitimate free speech and potential criminal acts. I mean, these are the same people that were just apoplectic over the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act was going to be used to prosecute Americans, even though the Patriot Act actually had in it virtually no new law enforcement authorities at all. And it actually had mechanisms of oversight and control. And yet they literally, on the most vapid basis, saying a joke, saying, well, that person is a potential insurgent. I mean, the use of the word insurgency, when we've seen real insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan, to label Americans insurgents, the sense of proportionality is just completely gone from American politics. But the flip side of this is, look, I don't think anybody's really buying this.
But put your analyst hat on. Your counterparts, as when you were an analyst, counterparts in China, Soviet Union, and Russia, they see this. They see 70 million Americans, or thereabouts, marginalized, first put in the basket of deplorables, now being hunted as political enemies of the state. How do you think they're going to analyze it? What are the logical outcomes of this kind of thing?
Well, I think they would say we have to stop wasting our money on propaganda and disinformation in the United States because the Americans are doing way too good a job of that themselves. You know, I've often been fairly dismissive of Chinese and Russian propaganda for exactly that reason. How would you know? I mean, the fact that you have mainstream American political leaders, people with credible academics, and media attacking Americans in a way that would be exactly the kind of disinformation that the Russians and Chinese would design. That tells you. So I do think that the Russians and Chinese might have a little longer perspective. They can think back just a year when you had a president that had a foreign policy that was strong and used American power in a way that they feared and that our allies respected. And they know that country's still there. So I think they see Biden presidency and all this Democratic discord as the gift just keeps on giving. But I don't know if they can count on that forever.
Speaking of the Russians, so negotiations beginning over Ukraine, and against the backdrop of the revolt that happened in Kazakhstan, actually, interestingly, started over a spike, an increase in fuel prices, and Putin claiming credit for repressing that revolt there and preventing a coup d'etat in Kazakhstan. Is there anything that we should take from Kazakhstan that should inform what we're demanding of Putin, or what we hope to get from Putin with respect to these negotiations?
Yeah, look, first of all, I don't think the negotiations are going to produce anything. This isn't a diplomatic problem. This is Russia bullying the United States. This is not a disagreement between nations. I think what Kazakhstan does is that I think the president actually has a window. Because the Russians are in Kazakhstan, a lot of people think, well, until that situation is completely cleaned up, they're not going to move on Ukraine. The Chinese aren't going to be aggressive or anything until after the Olympics. So the president's almost got a month where he could really aggressively move to strengthen his position in Europe and vis-a-vis the Chinese. This sort of really bothers me. He just wasted a whole week on 1-6. And then on their ridiculous electoral bill, which is about a national takeover federal elections. Here we are faced with dire threats to American security. He has a window of opportunity, if he really threw himself into this, to really put the United States in a stronger position and buck up allies. And instead, he's calling a lid at 2:00 at the White House, and he's basically only coming out and throwing energy into the politics.
I want to raise the specter of the Chinese, too, before we let you go, the Chinese communists and what they're doing to punish those who deviate from Chinese communist orthodoxy. The Lithuanian case. So Lithuania allows Taiwan to open a representative office in its capital of Vilnius, and China is not only holding up Lithuanian imports to China, it's going after Lithuanian exports to everywhere else. For example, it's holding up Lithuanian imports or anything that has a Lithuanian-made part in it from being transported to Europe as well. Seems like this is a ratcheting up of what China is willing to do to punish countries it can that provide any aid and comfort to anybody that the Chinese communists see as an enemy to the Chinese communists.
Yeah, well, this actually goes back to the point I just made. The Europeans are being pressed by the Russians, and they're being browbeat by the Chinese. And this is just a foretaste of what's to come. And the Europeans know that. There's never been a more moment for the President of the United States to step forward and exercise real leadership. And he's not. And look, I mean, I think the Europeans all see this coming, but there is no unity among them on how to deal with this. And they really need U.S. leadership. And
what should Biden's response to that play against Lithuania be?
Well, I would turn around tomorrow and buy a billion. I don't even know what it is, but buy a bunch of stuff from Lithuania, and I would go to every single European country and say, look, I'll be with you. You stand up against the Chinese pushback, and I will be with you in every way I can. I heard the president say that. Why doesn't he say that in public?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
He hasn't said anything about Lithuania in public at all, ever. Not one word.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at Heritage, and the author of the book Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, thanks for joining us, and he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro Answer Line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
When you're serious about your concealed carry training and education and are ready to learn from an active police officer with a teaching degree, check out Illinois Concealed Carry Training in Midlothian. You'll learn safe, responsible firearm use, home defense planning, conflict avoidance, situational awareness, and how to remain physically, morally, and financially safe in the event you must use your firearm in self-defense or the defense of another. Weekday and weekend classes available.
I'm Sergeant Gary Carr, police firearms trainer and the owner of Illinois Concealed Carry Training. We'll arm you with what really counts: knowledge and training. All concealed carry curriculums are not created equal. This may be the single most important decision you'll ever make for yourself and your loved ones. Choose between 3 and 16-hour classes that are available both weekdays and weekends. We are your one-stop for concealed carry classes, fingerprints, and legal defense plans.
To register for a class or purchase a self-defense legal service plan, go to icct.us. icct.us.
Guys, it's important to prioritize your health. I recommend getting an annual health assessment with my friends at Low T Center. They check all your levels, not just your testosterone levels. Low T Center exclusively specializes in men's wellness, and they make it quick and easy to take care of your health. If you've been feeling tired, grumpy, have noticed weight gain and loss of muscle mass, these could all be signs of low testosterone levels, low thyroid, or even sleep apnea. Low T Center can determine the cause and help. And now Low T Center offers the convenience of monitored self-inject at-home testosterone treatments for only $155 a month per